When Charles Willson Peale and his wife had their first child in 1774, they named him Raphael. Their next son was called Rembrandt, followed by Titian, Rubens, Sophonies by Angusciola, Benjamin Franklin, Titian, and Elizabeth. Except for Benjamin Franklin, they were all named after famous painters, and it can't be a surprise that their father was a painter himself and that he had the ambition to turn his kids into artists as well. And most of them did indeed become artists later in life. The broader family would produce many artists as well, having a big influence on the development of art in the United States during the 18th and 19th centuries. And they stood at the basis of the many museums there are nowadays in the United States. And if they did not become painters, they were often successful in other fields, as the family includes some well-known scientists, inventors, businessmen, writers, engineers, and historians. Arguably the most famous and influential member from the Peale family is also the oldest, Charles Willson Peale, who lived between 1741 and 1827. His father had died during his teenage years, and he first started a career as a saddle maker, followed by some other odd jobs before he discovered that he actually had a talent for painting. He studied with well-known American artists like John Hesselius and John Singleton Copley before moving for 3 years to England to study with his influential countryman Benjamin West. When he returned to the United States at age 33, he became a professional painter. Among the people he taught the art of painting on his return was his younger brother James Peale, who would also become an artist. I've tried to put the artist lineage of the Peale's family in a simple family tree. On top is Charles Peale, the man who died early and was not an artist. Two of his kids, just mentioned, Charles Willson and James, would become professional artists, and they inspired the next generation, resulting in 6 kids of Charles Willson, the son of his sister Elizabeth, and 4 of the kids of James becoming painters. And then there were 3 grandchildren and 1 great-great-granddaughter who also became artists. As mentioned, the biggest inspiration for all these artists was Charles Willson Peale. Among his achievement is that this portrait from 1779 of George Washington at Princeton is still today the American portrait that sold for the highest price ever, which was $21.5 million. It all started for him by his enthusiasm for the American Revolution, which he actively joined in the military, where he made it to the rank of captain and participated in some famous battles. In between the fighting, he would paint miniature portraits of other army members, many, including George Washington, who would become important people in American history. And after his military service, he would turn these miniatures into large-scale portraits. Charles Willson Peale, whose self-portrait from 1791 you can see here, specialized in portraits, not only producing them of influential and wealthy people, but also from his family members, like here with his first wife and daughter. Besides his artistic works, he would make significant contributions to society, including a new way of setting up museums, about which we talk more at the end of this video. Rembrandt Peale was the 3rd child of Charles Willson Peale, who by the way had 17 children spread over 3 marriages, of whom only 6 reached adulthood. Among all the members of the Peale family, Rembrandt is my personal favorite. Some of his most famous works are this portrait of George Washington and the portrait of the 3rd President of the US, Thomas Jefferson, which you can see here. He had painted his first self-portrait at age 13, and he proved to be a talented artist, living up to the name Rembrandt he had gotten. At age 17, he had already painted a portrait of George Washington, thanks to the efforts of his father. But what really formed his style were the times he spent in Europe, and specifically the 2 years he spent in Paris in his early 30s, soaking up the neoclassical style of some of the leading French artists. One of his most accomplished works in the neoclassical style is this painting entitled The Roman Daughter. It shows a father and his daughter, and it refers to Roman charity, a famous story where the father is sentenced to starvation, but the daughter keeps him alive through breastfeeding. When they are finally caught, the loving devotion shown moves authorities so much that the daughter is forgiven and the father is freed. After Charles Willson and Rembrandt Peale, James Peale, the younger brother of Charles Willson, was probably the most successful one. He had learned to paint from his older brother, and he specialized in portrait paintings and still life scenes. And later in life he became a specialist in miniatures. And these genres also appealed to many of the other family members. For example, the granddaughter of James Peale, named Mary Jane Symes, was a portrait painter and also specialized in miniatures. The daughter of James Peale, Anna Claypool Peale, also specialized in miniature portraits and still life. Her sister Margaretta focused solely on still life scenes, while their other sister Sarah Miriam Peale specialized in portraits, and she is often labeled as the first American woman to succeed as a professional artist. Then we have the children of Charles Willson Peale. First up is the oldest Raphael, who became the first professional still life painter in the United States. And then there's Titian Ramsay, who took a somewhat different path, but still used his creative skills as he became a well-known scientific illustrator, naturalist and explorer, and later in life he enthusiastically picked up the camera to take photographs. Then there was Rubens Peale, who first became a museum administrator. Even though he enjoyed painting, he suffered from poor eyesight and he only actively painted during the last decade of his life, specializing in still life. Finally, we have Rosalba Carriera Peale, the daughter of Rembrandt Peale, who was a lithographer, a portrait and landscape painter. Mary Jane Peale, who painted portraits and still life, often including flowers, and Charles Peale Paul, who became a portrait painter. In 1784, Charles Willson Peale established the Philadelphia Museum, which started as an art museum but added a natural history collection as well. It was one of the first American museums and he started it in his own house. But almost 2 decades later, he found a new location in the city, which was at Independence Hall. He left one of his sons in charge of the museum and inspired his other children to follow in his footsteps. In 1814, his son Rembrandt opened a second Peale Museum in Baltimore, which was the first purpose-built museum building in the United States. And in 1825, his other son Rubens opened a third museum in New York, making many artworks and natural specimens publicly available. One of the innovations of the Peales was that they started relations with museums abroad, exchanging pieces with each other, and like that bringing unique works or species to their museums. Another innovation was that they used scientific knowledge to build and organize their collections. Other American museums would mostly display specific items as curiosities from around the world. But for example, Peale advocated using a scientific taxonomy to create structure and knowledge for the visitors. For example, they would not just place an exotic animal on its own, but would put the animal in its natural habitat, educating visitors about the world around them. Or they combined natural specimens with artworks to provide additional context. And even more than that, they developed improved preservation techniques and integrated live lectures and demonstrations to further engage the audience. And while the museums of the Peale family have not lasted, some having been taken over by other institutions, mostly because they failed to secure government funding, the concepts of how to run a successful museum have heavily impacted the practice of future American museums. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little overview of the Peale family of artists, and if you did, please consider supporting the channel by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. And as always, if you have any thoughts or questions you would like to share with me or the viewers, please leave them in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.